this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to talk about Sisters of Battle and why I think they are underperforming. First, we're going to talk about why I think they're underperforming, what the glaring weaknesses are in the Army, and then how do we play with them then? What can we do to kind of mitigate those weaknesses? And then we'll talk about a few of these standout units. We're not going to cover all of them in depth. We're just going to do a quick top three, and maybe not even top three, just three that stick out to me. So I think really Sisters are underachieving. Not underperforming. I think they're underachieving would be a better way of putting it. But I think that is partially because I feel like they might be a victim of the current meta. And what I mean by that is that like Knights and Wraith Knights are just dominating, right? High toughness and a lot of wounds, high damage output, and Sisters lack the tools to deal with high toughness. If you look at the codex, or the index, I should say, the highest strength weapon is the Hunter Killer Missile, and that's strength 14. And you can get one on basically like a Rhino or an Exorcist, like a lot of your tank type vehicles, but you only get one and it's single shot. The next strongest attack is strength 12, and that's a melee profile on the war suits. And that melee profile is strength 12 minus 1 3 damage, and it hits on fours. And that minus 1 AP is going to be very underwhelming going into a Land Raider or a heavy tank. And hitting on fours is going to make it a lot less efficient. Outside of that, the highest strength ranged attack is 10, and that is limited to Exorcists, which really just went up in points because of the indirect rule, right? GW did the balanced data slate, and anything that does indirect fire for the most part got a points ramp. And then the Castigator, which is strength 10, minus 1, 3 damage. And again, it's just kind of underwhelming into vehicles because that minus 1 AP. Another part of it is because meltas, which are a staple in the Army, went down to 18 inches of range, multi-meltas anyway, and they only went to strength 9. So multi-meltas, which have historically been very good anti-vehicle weapons, are struggling to put wounds on anything heavier than a Rhino. And if you've got a battle wagon, which is now T10, without the hard case, you're wounding it on fives. So it's one of those where a lot of these bigger high toughness lists that are doing really well, Sisters just don't have the strength to deal with them efficiently or effectively. You cut the range by 6 inches when they were already a medium range army at best, and now they have to get even closer. And like I said, going from strength 8 to strength 9 means Meltas really just aren't super great into anything heavy. I think Indirect also plays into why they're underachieving. If you're bringing infantry, it's a lot of T3 bodies, and even the Penitent engines, I think, are T5 or T6 at best without looking. So a lot of the Whirlwinds and Exorcists and even Basilisks, things like that, are wounding them on threes at worst, and some of it just wounds them on twos. So that means everything is just getting picked up a lot easier than it probably should be. And I think Overwatch also plays into this. I do think Overwatch is a mechanic that needs a change. It is very easy to abuse with certain armies, and it punishes certain armies for playing troops or infantry. Elves, Sisters, anything with a T3 one wound body, I'm just getting punished for playing my own movement phase, especially if my opponent has the ability to overwatch with multiple units. A lot of times that second overwatch is free, and it becomes very restrictive on how I get to interact and play in my own turn. And to me, it's a big problem. I think the best fix for Overwatch is to either increase the command point cost by 1 across the board, so it's no longer free, and it's 2 to do it at 24 inches, or we take the range down to 12 so that it's a little bit easier to manage. You should not have range 24 inches out to just shoot me on my own turn multiple places and just effectively pin my infantry on my own turn. Some glaring weaknesses in the Army. They do have a few, obviously, or they wouldn't be struggling right now competitively. Aside from what we've already mentioned, they are extremely short range for their staple weapons, which I touched on, but it is a big weakness. 18 inches for your multi-melt is going to really mitigate how effective they are at killing these things that have like a 24 or a 36-inch range. I have to get well within Overwatch range to be able to shoot you with my Retributor squad, for example. It's not a very mobile army for the most part. It's a lot of 6-inch movement infantry. You do have a couple of jump pack options and a few vehicles, but for the most part, they're a slower army. The Hospitaller also no longer replenishes models. I believe that is locked exclusively to Celestine and her bodyguard unit now, whereas the Hospitaller used to be able to put a D3 models back into a unit. She doesn't do that anymore, and this really does matter a lot. When you have elves that can do it, you have nids that can do it, you have orcs that can do it, all these one wound like chaff units have this ability, and the only way sisters can kind of interact with that is locked behind a named character. And I'm not saying it needs a change, I'm just saying I think it's affecting their ability to stay on the board. So, how do we play them? Well, despite Melta's feeling like total ass, I don't think you bring less. I think you bring more, right? You bring multi Meltas en masse because they will still kill Terminators, they will still kill Custodes, they will still really decimate other infantry. So you're going to have an okay matchup against some of these other armies. And in addition to that, the more multi-meltas that you have on the table, the more likely you are to roll that 4 or 5 when rolling your wound rolls. So it's one of those where if you throw enough dice, you'll get something through. And then just save your miracle dice specifically for this interaction. If you know you're going to need a wound to punch through on something, you want to bank those miracle dice and use them for that rather than saving them for other things. And really, the index and the codex, when it is out, isn't really big, so you're going to have to really be prepared to lean on a few of your standout units. There aren't a ton of data sheets here, and honestly, a lot of them are average at best. You have a few standouts, but the ones that are average, or your standouts, are going to be the ones that you're going to be building around or using a lot more. There are a few secondary objectives that help, especially if you play fixed. I think if you play tactical, this is another army where you're probably going to struggle because you don't have the mobility to kind of change gears quickly. You also are going to have to be very careful. Unless Overwatch gets addressed and some of the other issues in the game get addressed, you're just going to have to be careful. And a good example of that was there was a time where I literally disembarked from a Rhino behind the Rhino so that my opponent couldn't draw line of sight. Then I had to move the Rhino up in front of his unit so that my opponent couldn't draw line of sight. And then I had to just trail the Rhino with my infantry, just using the Rhino to block line of sight the whole time. And it was a pain in the ass, honestly. It was really rough to have to play like that simply because if I didn't, he had 10 Terminators with Stormbolters, and I'm just going to pick them all up on my own turn. So what ended up happening was I ended up doing that, charging the Rhino to soak the Overwatch into his Terminators, and then charging the Zephyrim into his Terminators right afterward. Some fixed objectives that can help. Cleanse is going to be a staple in a lot of Sisters games, I think, because it interacts very similarly to the way Shrine did in 9th. So if you're a Sisters player, this is at least a style of play you're going to be used to. You should be able to get to an objective and then farm some points on it. If you can get to 2, that's even better. Teleport homers is going to be another also like very easy one, especially if you can get cleanse and teleport homers on the same objective. You need 2 units to do it, but if you can just sit there and kind of do it multiple times, it's awesome. Like, you can make it. Teleport homers, you're also going to have deep strike, and your Seraphim are very mobile, so you'll be able to kind of try to get those into your enemy's deployment zone to get the extra points. Dominions and Penitent engines can also advance and do either of these, cleanse or teleport homer, so both of those units will be very useful because of their assault keyword on their weapons. Like I said, Seraphim have the built-in fire and fade, so they get an extra 6 inches, so they can get up the table pretty quickly. A brief list of standout units. I know a lot of people are poo-pooing the Sisters melee units. I think they are looking pretty solid. The Repentia, I love them in 8th, I love them in 9th, and I think they are still one of the best units in this index in 10th. They are strength 6, -2, 2 damage attacks. They only get 2 attacks per model, but if you have the Repentia Superior in the squad, they just reroll hits and wounds on the charge. And then you can give them +1 to wound for a command point, which will make them incredibly efficient. They will die extremely fast, but if you get them to their target, they will trade up every time. I promise you that, unless your opponent just has like bonkers dice, right? But for the most part, they're going to trade up just because re-rolling efficiency, getting your hitting on threes, getting your re-rolls, getting your wounding on most infantry on threes, maybe fours and re-rolls, and then you can +1 to wound it, etc. You're going to get damage through. You should trade up fairly well. Celestine, to me, is another standout. If you put her in a bodyguard of 10 Zephyrum, it is expensive, but she revives models. Her melee is good, her shooting is solid, and she does help shore up some of the mobility issues in the army. So I think that's worth a look. I have run 10 Zephyrum with her on a few games already, and I've liked the interaction. I've never walked away going, man, I wish I didn't bring Celestine in these Zephyrum. And then other standout units, and I already mentioned these, Dominions and Seraphim. Again, the mobility. The sisters lack a lot of mobility, so anything that can keep you moving and keep you mobile is going to help you score objectives. So just keep that in mind. I will do a more in-depth look at some of the sisters interactions a little bit later down the road. I am working out a schedule so I can go from a rotation of sisters, orcs, and elves. And once I kind of hit my stride, I'll let everybody know what the rotation's going to look like. Overall, I do think sisters have a lot of tools in the toolbox, but their short range and the current meta really holds them back. I think nerfing indirect units and towering units will help them a little bit, although the Exorcist did get the same points hike, and that does hurt them also because that's one of their few semi-high strength guns in the whole index. And honestly, they could have just stripped indirect away from it or made it a strat like they did in ninth, and that would have been fine. But the points hike is going to probably hurt sisters disproportionately because they're already lacking in high strength shooting. And that's going to do it for my video on Sisters of Battle for today. Thanks for listening. I'm going to give a shout out to my patrons, Captain Too Tall, The Real Donnie G, Lord Wellingstone, and Daniel Bodecker. Thank you guys. Your support is what keeps me going, lets me run events, and do everything that I do to try to help the community. There's some links on the screen, but we're going to change it up a little bit. I do have an affiliate link in the description. That's going to be the only link in the description today. And that affiliate link will actually be for Army Speed Paints. If you're listening to the end, just so you know, I am an Amazon affiliate. I do use Army Speed Paints. They help me paint my armies very fast, especially when I have to cram for a tournament. So I found that their products are very good and I enjoy them. So if you are a person who's going to buy them, just consider using my affiliate link. It won't cost you any extra money. All it does is gives me a small commission based off of that purchase for using my link. So if it's something you're going to buy anyway, it's kind of a it's a no additional cost to you way to support my channel. So I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.